abducted, taken to Port Elizabeth where they'd been killed, Gqeberha. And then on Wednesday, we will have the inspections in loco here in Gqeberha at the various scenes, including the scene where the burnt-out car of Mr. Gqeberha had been found. And for Thursday, we have arranged for Professor Derek Swartz to come and testify. We've had to make special arrangements with him as he is traveling extensively, and he needs to travel to, I think, China on Friday. So we've agreed that his evidence be led on Thursday, and thereafter it will be the family witnesses. That is all.
And his evidence is not likely to implicate any of the persons of interest?
Normally.
Yes, you can proceed, Mr.
That is all. Thank you.
Yep. Mr. Vanning.
As the court pleases, the lady on the 27th of June 2025, just over 3 weeks' time, we will mark the 40th anniversary of the brutal killings of Matthew Gqeberha, Fort Kalata, Kelo, Mhlali, Gqeberha, and Conto, connected known as the Cradock Four. After 40 years, the families are still waiting for justice and closure. Well, lady, before I proceed, may I hand up a copy of my heads of argument? We do have some copies for our colleagues, which we will distribute. On the 27th of June 1985, they were abducted, assaulted, murdered, and their bodies burnt by the security branch of the erstwhile South African police. They were murdered as part of the apartheid regime's ruthless campaign against those mobilizing resistance to the pernicious system of racial oppression. The stories of the lives of the Cradock Four, their struggle for freedom, and their untimely deaths are etched into the history of South Africa. These were 4 young men who had so much to offer South Africa. They were visionaries and leaders. The lady, post-apartheid South Africa is a poorer place without them. We could have used their guiding hands and wisdom. They would have inspired us to do better. Most of all, they were dearly loved and treasured by their families, friends, and comrades. The searing pain of their absence persists with the families to this day. Milady, in this first session of this, the third inquest into the deaths of the Cradock Four, we will hear from the following family members: Rekanya Kalata, son of the late Fort Kalata; Namonde Kalata, wife of the late Fort Kalata; Dorothy Kalata, daughter of Fort; Tamani Kalata, also daughter of Fort; Monwaba Mkonto, son of the late Sparrow Mkonto; Nyanise Gqeberha, son of the late Matthew Gqeberha; Imbuyi Mhlali, wife of the late Gqeberha Mhlali; Itsika Mhlali, the son; and Gobani Zonke, brother-in-law of the late Mhlali. We will also hear from Inge Domini Shalkutsia, who presided at a reconciliation meeting between former Security Branch Officer Eric Taylor and several family members. The lady at this meeting, Taylor, confessed to his role in the killings. He is now deceased. Turning to the case of the families, the lady, we intend to demonstrate that the deaths of the Cradock Four were brought about by way of a calculated and premeditated decision of the apartheid regime, taken at the highest level of the government state security system. It was then meticulously planned by the security branch in an official operation. The lady, this was no private frolic or errant police officers departing from official instructions or policy. The killers did exactly what they were told to do and exactly what was expected of them. In the early to mid-1980s, the Eastern Cape, and Cradock in particular, was the epicenter of the fight back against apartheid. This resistance was led by Matthew Gqeberha, Fort Kalata, Imbelela Gqeberha, Gqeberha Mshlali, Sparham Konta, Madola Jacobs, and many others. They established local organizations and street committees in virtually all towns in the regions and were able to mobilize thousands to come out onto the streets. Further afield, in Port Elizabeth and elsewhere, community leaders like Sipho Charles Hashe, Kwakwalu Gqeberha, Champion Galele, Simpiwe Ntumkulu, Topsy Madaka, Izingziwe Kondila were similarly mobilizing. The apartheid state did not know how to deal with this rising tide of defiance. They tried just about everything in their security toolbox. Multiple detentions without trial, a slew of death threats, acts of arson and intimidation, orchestrated firing from public and private posts, disinformation and propaganda. Milady, none of it worked. Indeed, it only emboldened the activists and fired up their supporters. So from the early 1980s and culminating in the mid-1980s, the security forces opted for more permanent solutions to these troublemakers, namely extrajudicial executions, or to coin security speak, elimination or permanent removal from society. In 1981, the security branch abducted, tortured and murdered COSAS activist Kwezi Kontile, and his body was found burnt. While in 1982, they kidnapped, tortured and murdered COSAS activists Sipiwe Ntumkulu and Tobakile Topsy Madaka, whose bodies were also found burnt. The 3 security branch officers associated with the Cradock Four case, Nicolaas Janse van Rensburg, he was second in command of the security branch in Port Elizabeth at the time, Gerrit Nicolaas Erasmus, who in 1984 was the head of the security branch in Port Elizabeth, and Hermanus Barend du Plessis, he was the security branch head of Black Affairs in the Eastern Cape region. They were granted amnesty for the kidnapping and murder of Kandila and also Ntumkulu and Madaka. Milady, just a few weeks before the Cradock Four murders, between 8th and 10th of May 1985, the security branch conducted a similar operation against Hashe, Gorolozi, and Galela, famously known as the Pepco 3. The 3 civic activists were abducted from Port Elizabeth Airport and removed to the isolated Post-Chalmers farm, where they were tortured and murdered. 4 of those who applied for amnesty in that matter were also involved in the Cradock Four killings, namely Harold Snyman, who in 1985 was the head of the security branch in Port Elizabeth, Hermanus Barend du Plessis, Johannes Martin van Zyl, also known as Saki van Zyl, and Gerhardus Johannes Lotz. Lady van Zyl and Lotz were members of the security branch based in Port Elizabeth. All except Snyman were denied amnesty. In his amnesty application, van Zyl said his murder weapon in the Pepco 3 murders was an unlicensed .22 caliber firearm, which exactly matched the description of the firearm he used to murder Sparham Konta. The Cradock Four murders were hardly an isolated event. It was rather part of a systematic program of abduction and murder of leading anti-apartheid activists in the Eastern Cape at this time, involving considerable overlap in those involved in the planning and execution of these crimes. But it is important to set the scene, to look at the context of what was taking place in Cradock and the Eastern Cape in the early 1980s. And I'll start in 1983. In that year, Matthew Gqeberha and Fort Kalata spearheaded the setting up of the Cradock Youth Association, known as Cradoya, and the Cradock Residents Association, known as Cradora. They and others led protests against high rentals imposed by the local administration board. Gqeberha and his comrades set up United Democratic Front structures throughout the Eastern Cape and engaged in mass action against the dictates of apartheid local government entities. In order to neutralise the impact of Matthew Gqeberha in Cradock, the security branch placed pressure on the Department of Education, which I refer to as DET, to remove him from Cradock. And DET complied by transferring him to a school in Gqeberha in late 1983. However, Gqeberha refused the appointment, and when he did not report for work in Gqeberha, the DET told him he had dismissed himself, and he was officially fired on 27 January of 1984.